Total Access Week in Review. I'm Darren Horton. Earlier this week, a pioneer of the National Football League passed away. Wellington Mara, the NFL's senior owner who led the New York Giants for 8 decades, died at the age of 89. In April, Wellington Mara was diagnosed with cancer of the lymph nodes. Those in the Giants family knew it was serious when Mr. Mara, who was a fixture at practices and in the locker room, was not around as much. When the Giants opened training camp, Mr. Mara was receiving radiation treatment. When the season began, he was in the hospital. And then on Tuesday morning at 9:26 Eastern, Wellington Mara passed away at the age of 89. Over the next hour, you're going to hear from several of Mr. Mara's former players, coaches, and colleagues, including Frank Gifford, Tiki Barber, and Commissioner Paul Tagliabue. You're watching a very special edition of NFL Total Access Week in Review.
Give my sympathy to the Mara family. Mr. Mara represented our league with a lot of integrity and class. He was in the league over 8 decades. Had a lot of wisdom to give to a lot of people, and he'll dearly be missed.
After we won the Super Bowl in 1986, we didn't have champagne in our locker room. We probably had Pepsi Cola and ginger ale, and I'd gotten Parcells with the Gatorade, and I wish I could have had a bucket of Gatorade to get Wellington Mara. And when he walked into the locker room, we pulled him into the shower and we drenched him, and that was our way of sort of celebrating with him. We wanted him to get wet just as the coaches were wet, and we had a great amount of respect for him. But at that time, you stop being grown-ups and you turn into little kids, and he was just as happy as all the coaches and the players, and because he had been there during those dark years with the Giants, so we wanted to celebrate with him.
For his decades of service to the National Football League, Wellington Mara was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1997. Mara witnessed 26 postseason appearances, 18 NFL divisional championships, 6 NFL championships, among them Super Bowls 21 and 25. The only interruption in Mara's tenure was during World War II, when he served with distinction for more than 3 years in the Navy. And for more on the passing of Wellington Mara, and to get a current Giants perspective, we turn on Giants Cam, where we find Tiki Barber. How are you, Tiki?
I'm doing okay, Darren. How are you?
I'm doing well. I understand you were among the current Giant players, one of the players that actually talked to Wellington Mara as soon as Monday night?
Yeah, I went up there a couple days ago, and it was I was fortunate. I consider myself very blessed and very honored to have been able to go up to his place in Westchester County and say goodbye to him and say a prayer with him. It's obviously a sad time for their family, and as a Giant who's been here for my entire career, one that touches all of us. And it's going to be lasting, but I think it'll also be a celebration about the kind of person he was as we carry forward.
He was a different kind of owner. You know, there's some owners in the National Football League who are kind of hands-off, but I understand he was at practice. You could often see him in the locker room. Yeah. Well, he was a hands-on guy, right?
He was always around, you know. He didn't say very much, but he would always be at practice, whether it be walking around the field getting his exercise, or other times he'd be sitting on this little cane that he used to have that had a little seat connected to it, sitting on the side of the field, watching us go through the particulars of a game plan. And he always had that sense of accountability with him watching you, because you knew he'd been in the game for so long that he had such respect for the game that we were playing on the field, and in return, we'd have respect for him. It was almost as like we had a sense of accountability because he was watching us at all times.
The last Giants game of Wellington Mara's life was that thrilling victory, that comeback victory against the Denver Broncos. And I understand that the players paid tribute to Wellington Mara in the locker room afterwards.
Yeah, we did. After the game, Coach Tom Coughlin, who is a great studier of history and all world history, but in particular, I think Giant history. He understands the importance that Wellington Mara played for this, not only our team, but for this league. And after that emotional win that we had this week against Denver, he went to the locker room and said, "Let's give 3 Dukes for Wellington." And so we gave 3 Duke cheer for him. And it's a good feeling, and it's a very prideful feeling to know that his last game, watching or experiencing as a Giant, was a great emotional win for us. We didn't give up. We were down early, and we found a way to pull it out with him as our inspiration.
It's well known that Wellington Mara is a pioneer in the National Football League. I'm curious, when new Giants come in, how do some of the older players convey to the young players who Wellington Mara is and the significance that he has in this league?
Well, it's hard to, actually, and sometimes it takes a little while before you appreciate all that he has done, not only for this league but for the players in this league. Back in the day when the league first started, it was a small, it was a few teams that were, playing and drinking beer afterwards, and it turned into the billion-dollar industry that it is today because of guys like Wellington Mara and Art Rooney and George Halas, who saw that this game could be very popular if executed the right way, and he's always been a statesman for it. He's always been a face of the NFL, and I think as you're here for a certain amount of time, you start to realize that. You start to see the tradition on the walls. You start to see and experience the aura that surrounds a man like Wellington Mara and the team that he has left in this organization.
There are some people in the sport of football at the ownership level that are businessmen. Wellington Mara is a guy that came through the football department. He actually did some personnel work early on in his career.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, did you guys ever talk football?
A little. He wasn't a man of very many words. Every now and then he'd come to the locker room and congratulate you and tell you to keep this up this way. But we knew that he had a deep knowledge of this game back from its way in its inception. He was a ball boy at age 7 or 8 or whatever it was. He ended up being a scout, and eventually he was the owner. So he's been through all levels of this team and for this league, and you have to respect that. And I think we all did. Every time you saw them, you had a sense of reverence about the person that he was and what he represented for everyone involved.
Tiki, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
That's Tiki Barber, remembering Wellington Mara with us on Giants Cam. And Link, when you think about some of the legends of this game, some of the owners, names like Halas and Lambeau and Rooney and Mara, you played for a guy in Al Davis. These guys were not corporate guys who had football as a hobby. They believed in football and were football businessmen.
But a lot of these people, and some more others that were named in the interview, believed that football was a business. It was a profession. They made the sport great. They put it on.
For over 8 decades, Wellington Mara and the Mara name was synonymous with pro football in New York City. From the formative years in the 1920s, when the Giants first began at the old Polo Grounds, to the present highly successful era, Wellington Mara and his family dedicated a lifetime to preserving an NFL tradition.
I think you have to look at Wellington Mara as a guy that in the formative stages of the NFL, when it was in its infancy, he was a very, very integral part of the flagship franchise in this league, along with the Hallases and the Rooneys and some of the other great owners that had the foresight to start this thing. All of us are the beneficiaries of that foresight.
That vision began in 1925 when Tim Mara purchased an NFL franchise for $500. Right from the beginning, the Giants were a success, and what success they had became the stuff of legend. There was, for example, the Sneakers Championship over the Bears in 1934, and its sequel in 1956. One of 19 divisional crowns was secured by Pat Summerall's dramatic kick in the snow, while the first of 2 Super Bowl championships was inspired by a legendary hit on Joe Montana and a timely play by a legend named LT. Throughout it all, Wellington Mara was there, as water boy and coach, as scout and secretary, general manager, and chief executive officer. It's been a family organization where Wellington Mara worked with his sons, his brother, and his father. Oh, he took some time off. A round of golf or two was always a welcome diversion. During World War II, service to his country was a duty readily performed. But it was his marriage to the former Ann Mumm that most occupied Wellington Mara's time away from the Giants. With 11 sons and daughters and some 20-plus grandchildren, the Mara clan kept growing and growing and growing. However, for Wellington Mara, the New York Giants were always a natural extension of his own family, no matter what era it was. With Wellington Mara, it was once a Giant, always a Giant. That applied to many familiar names like Kyle, Emlyn, and Frank, Lawrence, Phil, and George. It even applied to one former coach who moved on to gain great fame and glory elsewhere.
I never went to New York to play the Giants, without having dinner with Wellington and Ann the night before. And Ann was so sweet because she was a hard loser. His wife, she was a hard loser. And for years, we beat the Giants every game, during the 70s. And finally, thank goodness that it turned around for him. I was more happy for Ann than anybody else because she was such a hard loser. But they are a great family, and they're the great tradition. And I think this is the thing we miss today. We miss the Maras and the Houses and the people who built the league up to where it is today.
He's the kind of guy that I think professional sports needs, because he is genuinely concerned about the players, the outcome of the game, and not because it's something that he's a guy who invested money and bought a team and he wants to see the team win, but he has lived and died with the team, and actually he is one of us.
I'll never forget seeing Mr. Mara. The first time I ever met him, I didn't really get to meet him when I signed with the Giants, or when I was drafted and I came up and met the coaches or whatever. We were at training camp, and he was sitting on we had scaffolding then. We didn't have the towers that we have now, the machines, and they were filming from the top. He would sit on that first level every day. And after about a week, I swear, I went up to Harry Carson, and you asked Harry, I said, "Harry, who is that guy that hangs around all the time?" And he laughed, and I never forget. Well, I said, "What's so funny?" He goes, "That's the owner." And that's when I really knew who the owner was around here, Wellington Mara.
Led by Phil Simms and company, the 1986 Giants gave Wellington Mara and family the first of two memorable Super Bowl triumphs.
The Giants have accomplished something that many people thought they would never see.
After the Super Bowl, there was two things I wanted to do. I wanted to douse Bill Parcells with the Gatorade, which I did on the field, but also I wanted to douse Wellington Mara. And when we got into the locker room after the game, there was no Gatorade around. So myself, along with one or two other guys, pulled him into the shower. And we just turned the shower on and we just gave it to him. And we were happy for him because he's really a stand-up guy. He's always been a great owner and a great person.
For over 8 decades, the New York Giants were showered with success. During those many memorable years, Wellington Mara was a vital, active presence. The patriarch of the Mara family, Wellington Mara, as he has been for decades, will be remembered as one of the most respected and revered men in the game.
Wellington Mara dead at the age of 89.
He was a very generous and benevolent guy, and had a tremendous influence on my life and my family's life, and I will always be eternally grateful to him. That's on an individual basis. He's the only guy that's been here for the whole deal. And so, I had countless times where I talked to him about different things over the course of his 80 years, and in the league, and he's just a very hey, he was my friend. That's the best way I can put it.
We're pleased to be joined right now by a man who presented Wellington Mara for induction in the Pro Football Hall of Fame 20 years after Mara presented him for that honor, and that is Frank Gifford. Thanks so much for joining us, Giff. How you doing?
Thank you, Rich. Listening to Bill, it's an echo that we hear from so many of his former players, former associates at any level, coaching or whatever.
Well, Frank, again, I guess our condolences on the loss of a man that you said in your statement this week, quote, "I was probably closer to him than I was to my father," is what you said. Can you explain that?
Well, my father was an oil worker, and he was gone much more than most fathers would be, had to be. So it wasn't my father's fault so much, but it was when I first came to the Giants, Wellington Mara was my boss, and then over the course of the years, he became much like my father, and as both of us got into a lot of years, he became a very dear friend. I don't think I did anything that was very important in life without discussing it with him, and every time I did, it was something that I shouldn't have done probably. He was that kind of a friend. He was never judgmental in any way. If something went wrong and you talked with him, as Lawrence Taylor did when he had his problems, he didn't say, you know, you're bad, you're doing something wrong. He said, how can I help? And he said that to just about everyone he ever knew.
Now, obviously, it's well known that Mr. Mara was always at Giants practices all the time. My question to you would be, how do you think that he would avoid the being called meddlesome? You know, you think in this day and age, an owner who does that all the time would be too hands-on and things of that nature. How would you describe his omnipresence and how it affected the team?
Well, Wellington Mara, of course, when I arrived in the early 50s, it was a different time. He was the owner of the football team. He was on the sidelines. He enjoyed it. You could tell that. He was never criticizing the players or the coaches on the field. I never heard him ever do that. I'm not even sure he ever did that off the field. I mean, with the coaches, perhaps maybe in a private meeting or something. But he was very knowledgeable, too. You have to remember he was the first scout the Giants had and was their only scout for many, many years. He was the people who brought the personnel in. He had played a major role in developing the team that did so well in the late 50s and into the early 60s, bringing in Y.A. Tittle and Del Shopner. Those were his moves, not the coach's moves. The players enjoyed being with him. We enjoyed traveling with him on the plane or the train in the early days. He had a great sense of humor and just a wonderful man to be with.
What do you think league-wide his longest-lasting imprint will be?
Well, I think probably there's so many things. I heard a comment from Ball Tagliabue saying whenever Wellington Mara got up to speak at a meeting, there was silence. And there was no interruptions because they knew what he had to say was important or he wouldn't be bothering to say it. And he said it in all the most incredible speeches, and he was very careful with his words. They were chosen very carefully, and people had nothing but respect for the man, and particularly at that level in football. He was remarkable.
And finally, Frank, if there's one story that I guess stands out in your mind about Wellington Mara, the man, what would that be?
Rich, there's so many, but I do recall a couple of years ago, I've spent about 2 years getting all of the Giant alumni and finding their addresses and their phone numbers and going back really to the 50s. And we had a surprise party for him on September the 6th, which was the night before the opening game at Giant Stadium. And we had become real good friends with him. And we told him that Kathy was getting an award at the Tavern on the Green, and could he please stop by? Well, you can imagine, night before the opening game, and he was so mad he drove in with Ann, his wife, and apparently he pouted all the way in. And when he got there and he walked in, the first person I think he saw was Lawrence Taylor. And then he looked around, there was Sam Huff, and they were all there. And Bob, going back to the 50s, Johnny Amberg was there, Bob Schnelker was there, and he just was totally stunned. But it was a wonderful night. And the other thing that I remember about that night, the only speakers we could have, because if we would have been there, still been there, were the Hall of Fame guys. But what I remember is of all the players you talked to, everyone had a story about Wellington Mara, how somewhere along the line in their life he had helped them. Many of them it was monetary, but many of it was emotional, many of it was just being there, being supportive for something. And it was a very special night for all of us as we saw the Giant leader who had been with us on the sidelines, by the way, and it was just an extraordinary night to see this man just light up and glow with the satisfaction of seeing all these players come together again. They were his boys.
And getting them all together, that's testimonial enough about what a man he was, I'm sure. What a monumental logistical achievement that must have been for you.
It was. By the time we got it, after about 2 years of trying to get it put together, we got the Giants involved. We had people chasing them all over the country. And what it did was bring them all together, and we've now formed a kind of an alumni that we didn't have here with the Giants before. But Well loved the history of not only pro football itself, because he's a major part of that history, but he loved the background of the Giants. He loved to tell stories about it. And they weren't boring. They weren't living in the past or anything. They were colorful and as only he could articulate. He was right up to the end of his life at 89 years old. He was sharp as a tack. I spent a couple of really fascinating days with him in the hospital, and I watched the Dallas game with him, and which was a tough thing for him to watch, but he was right there. A truly remarkable man. I loved him very much.
Thanks for joining us, Frank. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich.
You bet. Frank Gifford joining us here on NFL Total Access, talking about his friend and compatriot and father figure, Wellington Mara, joining us here on this program. We will be right back after this.
Expectations would be for us, and the word that and the phrase that I've used is he would expect us to carry on. I don't think he expects us to walk around with our lower lip down around the floor. We all are very much aware of this week. There is no real script for this week. You know, our emotions are literally all over the place. We do know that Mr. Mara right now is scheming somehow to try to beat the Redskins. We've got to follow his lead and his example as always and move on. And so while on the one hand our hearts are heavy, on the other hand we celebrate his life, we recognize what he meant to all of us. We share some of the personal experiences that we have had, and we prepare for the Washington Redskins. Benevolence, great example, individual who seemed to have a tremendous capacity for saying and doing the right thing at the right time. When I first was hired, he would literally come by my office every day, and if he missed a day, he would come by to tell me, "Coach, I haven't forgot you. I'm just, you know, I was busy for a day or two and I didn't get down here." He would come by on his walk and just see how I was doing, how we were doing, if there's anything more he could do. I just look at what he meant to us all, to this organization. I see the glitter. I still see the glitter in his eye. I see the enthusiasm. You know, 80 years of going to practice every day, being involved in every draft meeting, literally knowing the details about every player, taking great pride in it, knowing the players on an individual basis, being there for them if their families or they needed any help of any kind. You know, the great example that he gave to us all, extended to us all with his own family, with his job, with his God. It doesn't get any better than what he provided for all of us. And as I said, this is a day in which your emotions are a week in which our emotions will be all over the place. But as I also reminded our team, the young, the old, no one has a script for this, but we have to find a way to focus, to concentrate on the job at hand, knowing full well that this is what he wants. This is what he would want us to do. No, without a doubt. That was the great attraction, to be honest with you. was to Mr. Mara treated every person that had ever been a New York Giant in any capacity as still being a New York Giant. And you were one of that family. And that's the way he treated you. First thing he said to me was, I didn't get to see him until after the process was all over and I came, to the stadium to formally accept the job. But the first thing he said is, welcome home. And that's what he meant.